Georgia Transportation Alliance. Thanks everybody for taking the time to log in today, spend your lunch hour with us. Hopefully it won't take quite an hour, but we're going to run through today and go over just some general background and structure of Georgia's transportation system. With funding, and we talk a lot about governance, we talk a lot about planning, and we thought it would be good to just give everybody an opportunity to get some general background on Georgia's transportation system, kind of the history of the system, and what we're going to be working on over the next couple of years. So again, thank you all for taking the opportunity to log in with us. We're going to record this, so it'll be available on our website later if you want to watch it another time. We also will have copies of the slides if anybody would like to see those after the presentation is over. And then, as always, if you have questions, feel free to submit those through your interface there, and then I'll go through questions as we get to the end of the presentation. So as we get started here, this is a slide that just kind of covers the history of major transportation developments in Georgia. Transportation is a huge, and always has been a huge part of Georgia's economy. Many of you participated last year as the Georgia Chamber celebrated our 100-year anniversary. And actually one of the first public policy initiatives that the Georgia Chamber worked on was the establishment of the Georgia Highway Department, which then became the Georgia Department of Transportation, and that was established in 1916, 100 years ago. And so next time you get an opportunity to see somebody at DOT, make sure to congratulate them on their 100-year anniversary. Georgia Ports Authority was launched in 1945, not too long after Delta Airlines became one of Georgia's oldest and longest serving anchor companies. It creates a lot of jobs here in Georgia. The Atlanta Municipal Airport created the largest single terminal in the country back in the 1960s. In the 70s, the Savannah Port became the largest port in the world. UPS, another great transportation company, located its corporate headquarters in Georgia in the early 90s. And it wasn't too long after that the Olympic Games came to Atlanta. We saw a lot of infrastructure improvements take place to prepare for that. Created over 80,000 jobs in the state. In 2012, we saw the passage of the Transportation Investment Act across kind of the heart of the state. In 2013, we saw the launch of several major public-private infrastructure projects in the Northwest Corridor Project and the 75 South toll lanes. And then, of course, most recently, we saw the passage of HB 170, creating significant funding improvements over at GDOT in 2015, and then in 2016, the passage of legislation that will allow MARTA to pursue first major capital expansion since its creation. So, going to go through a couple of modes of transportation and just hit some high points of the history of those modes, and then as well as some economic statistics about those modes. We have 109 publicly owned airports in Georgia. Those airports range in size from Hartsfield-Jackson to some of your more rural airports in places like Macon and Savannah, and down in Valdosta and up in Toccoa and places like that. Our airports generate approximately $4.5 billion a year in economic activity. They support roughly 36 to almost 37,000 jobs each year, and produce about $1.5 billion in annual earnings. Georgia really began to invest state funds and federal aviation block grants to develop the Joe Frank Harris Airport system back in the 1960s. And then in the 1980s is when we really began to see the William B. Hartsfield Atlanta International Airport grow to be a globally competitive airport. Most recent major infrastructure improvement there was the 5th runway in 2006. The international terminal opened in 2012, and as many of you have probably seen recently, Hartsfield just launched a $6 billion renovation project that will span the next couple of years, and continues to be the world's busiest airport in terms of departures and landings. On Hartsfield, just a couple of really cool facts about them. They generally average about 2,500 daily arrivals and departures. They move about 54,000 metric tons of cargo each month. One little known fact about Georgia is that Atlanta is the second largest inland port in the country, behind only Chicago, and that's driven largely by the airport. They move about 60,000 metric tons of mail. Annual economic impact is about $32.5 billion. They move about 250,000 people a day, paying out a little over $4 billion in wages each year, and then support off-airport jobs and wages in the amount of about $9.9 billion a year. So incredibly high economic impact to the state and also to folks that live and travel in the metro Atlanta area. Next mode is also talked about a great deal in Georgia, and that's our ports. The Port of Savannah is the largest single terminal container facility in North America, and the Port of Brunswick is one of North America's largest auto and heavy machinery ports. The Ports Authority was created back in 1945 by the Georgia legislature and saw its first major appropriation in 1957 with $8 million. The Central Georgia Railway sold the ocean terminal to the Georgia Ports Authority the next year in 1958. And in 1966, we saw the first effort to provide significant widening and deepening to the Savannah Harbor. And that cost $28 million back in 1966, so a far cry from the 400 to 600 million that we've been talking about over the last couple of years for the Port of Savannah. In 1970, the Port of Savannah was ranked number 6 among all United States ports. And in 1991, the Georgia Ports Authority spent significant funds to rebuild the Talmadge Bridge, just generally improving access to the area from a freight perspective. In 2013, the Savannah Harbor Expansion Project received its initial approval. It's expected to save shippers just over $200 million per year. And as many of you probably saw earlier this week, that project entered the first phase of its first major environmental mitigation project. It's about $100 million worth of environmental mitigation that will take place down around the Savannah River. So they've begun that part of the project, and that Savannah Harbor Expansion project is moving right along. The ports in Georgia support about 352,000 jobs, in direct and indirect jobs. That's about 8.3% of Georgia's total employment base. It is the second busiest U.S. port for exports. Supports about $2.5 billion in state and local taxes. Move roughly 3 million TEUs per year. That's 20-foot equivalent units. So when you look at the containers that are coming in, that's the term of measurement that they use to measure the cargo that comes in and out of the ports. The port supports roughly $67 billion in sales, which is about 9.5% of Georgia's total sales. Can't talk about the ports without talking about our freight and logistics network, which is one of the best in the country. One of the things that makes the Savannah Harbor and the Georgia Ports Authority as competitive as they are nationwide is the fact that we have 2 Class I railroads on dock. That's a situation that's very unique to Georgia. No one else in the country has that. So our rail network is the 3rd largest in the country. We've got roughly 4,700 miles of track. A lot of our freight traffic is carried by our 2 Class I railroads, CSX, which was a successor to ACL and Seaboard, and then Norfolk Southern, which was a successor to Southern Railway and Central Georgia Railway. Georgia has 24 short lines like the Heart of Georgia Railroad, the Georgia Southern Railway. These guys operate short routes that feed into the larger rail system. They're generally east-west routes, and they provide that last mile connectivity that moves that freight from our Class I main lines to smaller communities where the cargo is then broken down and shipped either by truck or sent to retail establishments where it reaches the end user. UPS is Georgia's largest logistics company, chose to locate its headquarters in suburban Atlanta in 1991. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport and our railroad system was a large reason for that. UPS is generally known as a trucking company. They have 55,000 drivers nationwide, but they're a huge rail customer. They move a lot of cargo on rail, and so our freight logistics network was a large reason that they decided to locate here in Atlanta. In 2011, a new inland port opened in Cordele, Georgia. They're connected to the Heart of Georgia Railroad, which is one of those short line railroads we talked about briefly. Eventually, this facility will create and support over 3,000 jobs. Georgia's Inland Port Network is a part of the Network Georgia program that has been created by the Georgia Ports Authority, and they're pursuing strategic location of these inland ports all around Georgia over the next 10 years. Recently, they announced the construction of a second inland port that will be up in Murray County in Chatsworth, Georgia. These inland ports are located strategically to facilitate the movement of cargo that is going from the Port of Savannah to other states around the country. So this is cargo that's not going to an end destination in Atlanta or in Georgia. It may be going to Chattanooga or Birmingham or Columbia or the region. So these inland ports are going to be spaced strategically to help move that cargo the most efficiently and cost effectively from our ports to these other areas around the country. So as we talked about, 4,700 miles of freight rail in Georgia, 2 Class I railroads, 23 or 24 short line railroads, depending on the corporate moving and shaking and who owns what facilities. We move approximately 25,000 trucks between Georgia and Tennessee each day. We run about 9,000 trucks between South Carolina and Florida each day. We move about 5,000 trucks between Florida and Tennessee each day. We have over 6,000, almost 7,000 freight-related employees earning more than $97,000 per year. So these are really high-wage, high-paying, good jobs that are created through the freight rail industry for Georgia citizens. About $100 billion is produced by 5 freight-related economic sectors in Georgia. So freight movement and logistics is a big business in Georgia. It's good for Georgia's economy, and it's good for Georgia's citizens as well. A lot of conversation about roads and bridges over the last couple of years as we've talked about different funding solutions and ways that we can better help GDOT do their job. A little known and sometimes little talked about fact is how blessed we are with our State Department of Transportation. Georgia DOT is one of the best state DOTs in the country, generally ranked in the top 3, delivering 85% of their projects on time and on budget. So we're really lucky to have the Department of Transportation that we have, and they oversee 1,244 miles of interstate highway. Georgia has 121,632 public road miles. We've got over 14,000 bridges. This network moves almost 6 million tons of freight each week. So when we talk about those truck trips between Florida and South Carolina and Georgia and Tennessee, those trips are moving almost 6 million tons of freight each week. Georgia's drivers, and that includes consumers and commercial vehicles, drive almost 110 billion miles per year. The vast majority of those are from people that live in Georgia. We also have a fair amount of tourist traffic, and folks that are driving through the state, so that does include some out-of-state mileage as well. Georgia has between 6.5 and 7 million licensed drivers. Those licensed drivers have about 7.5, almost 7.5 million vehicle registrations. This number of fatalities is actually up a little bit in 2016, but we average about 1.13 to 1.5 fatalities per 100 million miles of vehicle traveled. So we're generally above average as a state when it comes to safety standards and highway fatalities. Public transportation is also another big sector of Georgia's transportation economy. We're home to the nation's 9th largest transit system. Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, or MARTA. We're also home to 127 other robust public transportation systems in cities like Athens, Columbus, and Rome. We have large public transportation systems down in Savannah that include bus as well as boat. If you've ever gone down to Savannah, if you've taken the ferry across the harbor, those ferries are operated by Chatham Area Transit Authority. So cool little fun fact there, our transit systems run bus and they run rail, light and heavy rail, and they also boat ferries in some places. Our transit systems are very important. For every $1 billion invested in public transportation capital and operations, it supports an average of 36,000 jobs. That's, of course, direct and indirect jobs. And then for every $1 invested in public transportation, we get about $4 in general economic impact to the state. Our other 127 public transit systems can be anywhere from a mid-sized system in Athens or Columbus or Savannah to a very, very small, maybe 2 or 3 van operation in a rural community that's focused primarily on senior or medical transport. Those are also considered transit systems as well under Georgia law. As a part of the funding discussion that took place in 2015, the state appropriated $75 million in bond funding that was available through a GRETA administrated grant system. Governor Deal's office announced the awards of that grant funding today. It went out to 11 transit systems around the state, and I'd encourage you, if you're interested in that, to go check out the governor's website, and the press release is there and outlines what those grant awards are for those 11 systems across the state. The Georgia Regional Transportation Authority operates the express bus service. So if you've ever been in Metro Atlanta, if you've seen the green and blue and white buses that run regionally, that express bus system had almost 2.5 million boardings in 2012 and provide about $140 million in annual savings for Metro Atlanta commuters. MARTA has about 125,000 passengers each day. Our 128 transit systems across the state execute about 178 million statewide unlinked trips. MARTA stimulates about $2.6 billion in annual economic activity around the state of Georgia, and supports about 10,000 jobs around the state. One of the concepts in economic development that we talk about probably less than we should around the state is the value of keeping our existing business, and we always get really, really excited when Baxter or Caterpillar comes to Georgia and creates a bunch of jobs, but we also do well to focus on maintaining and keeping the jobs that we have. And so organizations like MARTA and the Georgia Department of Transportation support a lot of jobs around the state through investment in infrastructure projects, and that's a very good thing for our state. We have 14 urban public transportation systems. So these public transportation systems are operated in areas that have MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations. That's a traffic term that's set up by federal law. So we have 14 transit systems that operate in MPO areas. Then we have a 712 vehicle non-MARTA urban system fleet. So in those 14 urban public transportation systems, we have 712 vehicles. Of those grant awards through the state bond program that we were just talking about, a lot of that money is going to replace buses in that non-MARTA urban system fleet. So that's an exciting development for a lot of these local community transit systems around the state of Georgia. So we're going to pivot a little bit at this point and talk a little bit about how the state plans and executes transportation projects around the state. There are really 4 processes and documents that are used in that process. Most of this process goes through the Georgia Department of Transportation. The Georgia DOT is responsible for the coordination of the statewide strategic transportation plan. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the SSTP. This is Georgia's long-term transportation plan that's required by federal law. The first one was created and updated by Senate Bill 200 and ran through 2030. This transportation plan is updated on a fairly frequent basis by the Planning Division at the Georgia Department of Transportation. The statewide transportation plan is sometimes referred to as the SWTP. We're going to talk about a lot of acronyms here. So this plan is also federally required analysis of all of our transportation modes in Georgia. It runs on a 30-year window. That's also run through the Georgia Department of Transportation. More folks are familiar with the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, which is called the STIP. And this is Georgia's 4-year federally funded transportation capital improvements program. It's also compiled by the Georgia Department of Transportation and includes the transportation improvement plans that are developed by each of Georgia's 16 MPOs, or Metropolitan Planning Organizations. As a part of that process, each MPO in Georgia is required to develop its own transportation improvement plan that is then incorporated into Georgia's STIP. So for the areas in Georgia that are not part of a Metropolitan Planning Organization, the Atlanta Regional Commission or the Coastal Area Regional Commission, transportation planning is done by the Planning Division at the Georgia Department of Transportation. At the end of the process, they compile their own planning with the transportation improvement plans that are submitted by the MPOs around the state of Georgia, and that is what produces Georgia's statewide transportation improvement program. That's the 4-year rolling capital improvement program that GDOT uses to determine lettings and contracts and what gets built when. Georgia, in addition to what we've seen in terms of funding down at the state capitol over the last couple of years, Georgia has been very innovative, and we can't recognize Governor Deal and Speaker Ralston, Lieutenant Governor Cagle, and the Georgia Legislature and the Georgia Department of Transportation and all of our agency partners enough for what they've been able to accomplish over the last 10 years, even in the recession and in some tough economic times. And this is just a short list of some of the things, and we've talked about some of these already, but the state has allocated, budgeted over $200 million for the Savannah Harbor expansion project. Governor Deal proposed the final addition to that state expenditure back in 2014. So the state is committed almost $250 million to expand the Savannah Harbor. We talked about GDOT continuously delivers 85% of their projects on time and on budget. Respectively, they're generally ranked number 1 and number 2 across the country in those two categories. There's always an anticipated buildup each year when airport rankings are released, and there's always an airport somewhere around the world that tries to mount a challenge, but Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport is still the world's busiest airport, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. We talked about our freight rail network. That is the 3rd largest freight rail network in the country. Again, vitally important to the interconnectivity between economic development and what happens down at the Port of Savannah, which continues to be the 4th busiest in the country. And as we talked about in 2015, the Georgia legislature passed legislation to improve transportation funding in Georgia by almost $1 billion a year, and then a year later came back and create a mechanism whereby MARTA could conduct almost $2.5 billion in capital improvements over the next couple of years. So 2 really exciting developments on the funding side, and we're excited to see what our agencies do with that capability moving into the future. Some more updates from a timeline standpoint. We talked a little bit about this earlier. This week, crews began work on the bulk of the environmental mitigation work for Savannah Harbor expansion project. That environmental mitigation centers around reoxygenating the water as we go through that process, and so they've awarded a contract to an engineering firm who's developed a very highly complex system to do that reoxygenation, and they began that project this week. In 2017, as a part of the mechanisms that were passed by HB 170, all 159 counties in Georgia will be eligible to pass a 1 cent local option sales tax for transportation purposes. A couple of notes on this, as opposed to the previous T-SPLOST, which was a regional approach. Counties can now go it on their own if they have a list of local projects that are specific to that county. They can pursue that. They can also do it in a fractional fashion. So they can now, if they don't need a full 1 cent to fund their project list, they can do that by fractions of a penny, which is a really good thing from a policy standpoint, because now we can let project lists drive revenue instead of letting the revenue drive the project list. So that's a very good thing for Georgia counties around the state. The final thing I would say about that is that transportation purposes definition encompasses more than just roads and bridges. So communities can use this for freight rail improvements, or they can use it for public transportation improvements or multimodal improvements. So that transportation purposes definition was left intentionally broad so that local communities can pick the transportation needs that they meet. In November, voters in the city of Atlanta will have the opportunity to approve almost $2.5 billion worth of improvements to MARTA through a referendum. That was approved by the Atlanta City Council just this week. I think it was last night. So that's an exciting development again, just stressing the significance of MARTA being able to pursue significant capital improvements, really for the first time since they were funded. We noted this earlier, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport has officially begun a $6 billion capital improvement program that will obviously take quite a few years to execute, but we know that it will operate and look very different at the end of that process, and that's an exciting development for them. The Georgia Ports Authority is currently in the process of constructing Georgia's second inland port in Chatsworth, Georgia. The one in Cordell is off and running, doing very, very well, and so the Ports Authority has moved on to the second part of that, which is to construct that in partnership with CSX Transportation up in Murray County. For those of us that live in Metro Atlanta, this next one is a really exciting development. Probably not a day goes by that I don't run into somebody that wants to talk about the Managed Lanes project, and they don't know necessarily that it's managed lanes, but they just see the construction crews moving very rapidly on the Northwest Corridor project, particularly if you live up that 75 corridor northwest of Atlanta. So in 2018 and 2019, GDOT will open in partnership with CERTA approximately 53 miles of new interstate lanes north and south of Atlanta. These are the newest additions to Georgia's growing managed lanes network. We obviously saw the 85 hot lanes go in a couple of years ago, and they have just exponentially grown in popularity. So the Northwest Corridor project, it goes up 75 and 575 northwest of Atlanta, and then the 75 south toll lanes, which go through Henry County south of Atlanta, will open in 2018 and 2019. Those will be managed lanes, so they'll be tolled. They'll be headed into town in the morning, and then they'll be headed out into the suburbs in the afternoon. So that's going to be a really exciting development. This is a completely new capacity that will be available. A lot has taken place on the federal level over the last couple of years as well, and I'm just going to touch on some of the high points as we look to the future. Congress passed the FAST Act in December of 2015. This is a 5-year extension to the, or 5-year surface transportation bill. After several years of passing short-term extensions, which had a fairly significant effect upon Georgia's ability to build transportation projects, passed a 5-year surface transportation bill in December of last year. Slightly elevated funding levels that will result in about $600 million increase for Georgia over the next 5 years. Unfortunately, did not address long-term structural surface transportation funding issues. It did not address the insolvency of the Federal Highway Trust Fund and how that's going to be taken care of. So that's a conversation that we expect to see grow. We're already about 6 or 8 months into that surface transportation bill. So I would think within the next 12 to 16 months you'll start to see that conversation begin to pick back up as folks begin to look at different policy solutions for shoring up the Highway Trust Fund. In the meantime, I think we'll continue action on WRDA, which is the Water Resources Redevelopment Act. They are looking to move that authorization process to a 2-year cycle instead of a 4 or a 6-year cycle. And the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee is currently looking at a bill that has 15 or 16 major port-related projects in it. So that's something I think we'll see discussed over the balance of this year and into next year. They're also in the process of debating FAA reauthorization. The Senate and the House have somewhat different concepts of how that ought to operate, and so I think we're going to end up seeing a temporary extension, maybe for 60 or 90 days, while they continue to work through those issues. And that vote will probably come up sometime in July. So as we talk through a lot of these things, and we have these conversations with a lot of different stakeholders around the state of Georgia, we're doing it against the backdrop of what Georgia is going to look like from an infrastructure standpoint, or an infrastructure load standpoint, over the next 15 or 20 years. And there are really 4 numbers that we're looking at the Georgia Transportation Alliance, and why we're doing what we're doing, and how we ought to be constraining our policy activities, and what we're looking into as best practices and good policy innovations for the state of Georgia. One is a 60% increase in container traffic. As many of you have probably seen in the news, on June the 26th, the new Panama Canal, the new, bigger, better Panama Canal will open. And so we'll begin to see a significant increase in activity with these post-Panamax ships that you have and heard talked about. What this really means for Georgia is an increase in total container volume that's going to come into our ports. It means cheaper and more efficient transportation of that cargo into our ports. Post-Panamax ships are anywhere from 2 to 3 times the size of the current vessels that come into the Port of Savannah, and that's why that Savannah Harbor Expansion Project is so important. As we complete that Savannah Harbor Expansion Project and enable the port to accept more of those ships, then we'll see a significant increase in the amount of containers that are coming into the Port of Savannah. So we're currently seeing somewhere between 2.8 and 3 million containers per year. That number is going to go up by about 2.7 or 2.8 million over the next 14 years. Additionally, I'm going to skip down to the third item on that list and then talk about the second one. Over the next 14 years, we're looking at another 1.5 million people being in the state of Georgia, whether or not that's children that are being born to our current citizens or folks that are moving into the state. We're going to see that population rise fairly significantly. As a result, we're going to see probably another 130 to 135,000 more flights in and out of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport every year. So we're currently averaging 2,500 a day. You could do the math. It's a pretty significant increase just in the passenger traffic that's going to be coming in and out of the airport there. Probably the one that has the most impact on us in our day-to-day lives is the addition of another 1.5 million cars on Georgia's roads. And that's kind of a hard number when you think about it to comprehend, but it's a significant increase in the number of cars that we have on the roads. And so these are really the 4 numbers that we're looking at the Georgia Chamber, at the Georgia Transportation Alliance. And from an economic development, from an economic prosperity standpoint, how do we best enable the state to handle this increase in load? So what are we doing about it? A couple of things real quickly, and then I'll open it up for questions. If anybody has specific questions about what we're doing at GTA or the system itself and how to be prepared to respond to that. We're working through the Georgia 2030 project in partnership with the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. Chances are we've been either at one of your meetings, your organization's meetings, or we've been in your community around the state conducting surveys and doing focus groups and talking to business owners and local employees about what they think needs to happen in the state of Georgia with particular issues. Transportation is a huge part of that. We're conducting kind of a subset of that project, and we're looking at technical and engineering documents that are available from our agency partners. We're looking at survey responses and what Georgians think ought to happen. And then we're looking at economic indicators to really put together a strategic vision of what Georgia's transportation network needs to look like and what it needs to grow into over the next couple of years. So as a part of that, we will ultimately have been in 26 communities around Georgia. We've been in 24 of those so far. Those 24 trips have been over about the last 6 or 7 weeks. So we've been on the road a lot so far this summer. As a part of that, we also have 2 significant task forces that are going to be meeting over the balance of this year. One is focused specifically on public transportation and how we can do a better job of building out and supporting those 128 station systems across the state. And then one focused on the Transportation Investment Act and how we can best help local governments utilize that 1-cent transportation sales tax to build local transportation projects in their communities beginning in 2017. Additionally, we've been asked to help lead the effort to pass the Fulton County Transportation Splash that will be on the ballot in November. And so we're going to be heavily involved in that effort in educating and communicating with the citizens that live in Fulton County about the benefits of that transportation splash that will be on the ballot in November. We're fairly confident and excited about what the result of that's going to be, and so we hope it's going to be somewhat of a case study that we can use for other counties around the state beginning in 2017 as they look at putting their own transportation splashes on the ballot. With that, that is that kind of concludes the 4 marks that we had and the slides. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of where Georgia's transportation system is now, what the challenges are that we're facing, and we call them challenges, but it's really a good thing that we're looking at this kind of economic activity around the state. We just want to do a good job of being a steward of our opportunity to produce policy solutions and recommendations for how we can best be prepared to deal with those challenges as a state. So that's exciting for us on behalf of our leadership at the Georgia Transportation Alliance. We look forward to partnering with our local chambers and different associations and trade groups around the state, as well as our elected officials down at the state capitol and with the Georgia General Assembly moving forward. So with that, I'll open it up to see if there are any questions from anybody, and if not, then we'll have this available on our website. As I said, we'll post it on our website if you have other folks that you feel like need to see this or would benefit from any of the information. And then we'll have the slides available as well. And I don't see any questions, so we've either bored you to death, completely confused you, or we've covered enough material for the day. So again, thank you to everybody for taking the time to jump in with us, spend your lunch hour with us, and we'll be in touch when our next opportunity is available. So thank you again for your time, and we'll look forward to talking with you soon.